She was selling the house before the casket was even cold. The funeral had ended at 2:30 on a grey November afternoon in 2025, the kind of Ohio day where the sky presses down like a lid and every breath tastes of wood smoke and coming snow. They'd buried Ryan Matthew Callahan in the little cemetery behind St. Mary of the Assumption, the same church where he'd been baptized, where he'd married Lauren 12 years earlier, where their friends had promised till death do us part, while Max, their ancient German shepherd, sat quietly at the back pew with his head on Lauren's knee. Death had come quickly in the end. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to goodbye. The priest said the words, the casket lowered, the first shovelful of dirt hit the lid with a hollow thud that echoed inside Lauren's ribs forever. By 4 o'clock she was back at the farmhouse on County Road 17, still wearing the black dress she'd bought for exactly this occasion, signing the listing agreement the realtor had slid across the kitchen table like a sympathy card. The realtor's name was Candace. Bright blonde hair, sympathetic tilt of the head, voice soft as funeral home carpet. Cash offer already lined up, Lauren. Investors out of Columbus. They'll close in 10 days, no inspection, no repairs. You can walk away clean. Clean. As if anything about this could ever be clean. Lauren's hand shook so badly the pen left little comet trails of ink. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Ryan's hospital bed was still in the living room. The sheets stripped, but the indent of his body still visible on the mattress. His boots stood by the door exactly where he'd kicked them off the last time he came in from the barn. Max hadn't moved from Ryan's side of their bed since the ambulance took him away. He lay there now, a black and tan mountain of grief, eyes half open, ribs heaving slow. Candace kept talking numbers. Market value, quick sale discount, how fast the bank would foreclose if Lauren waited. Lauren heard none of it. She just signed where the little sticky arrows told her to sign, because the alternative was staying in this house with its echoing silence and the ghost of Ryan's laugh in every corner, and she wasn't strong enough for that. Not yet. The prospective buyers arrived the very next morning, Sunday, barely 24 hours after the burial. A black SUV with out-of-state plates rolled up the gravel drive, while Lauren was still in Ryan's flannel shirt, trying to force coffee past the lump in her throat. Candace led them in. A couple in their late 40s, polished and pleasant, the husband in a navy peacoat that probably cost more than Ryan's truck, the wife clutching a leather portfolio and smiling the tight smile of someone who already knew they were getting a steal. They moved through the rooms like they were taking inventory. The husband tapped the original hardwood floors with the toe of his loafer, murmured something about good bones. The wife opened kitchen cabinets, ran a manicured finger along the windowsills, made little approving noises. Lauren stood in the hallway, feeling like a stranger in her own life. Max hadn't come downstairs yet. She figured the stairs were too much for his hips these days. Then the husband stepped into the foyer and said, almost to himself, "We'll knock this wall out, open the whole thing up. Flip it by spring." Something about the casual certainty in his voice snapped the thin thread holding Lauren together. She opened her mouth to ask them to leave, to give her one more day, one more hour, when a low, rolling growl rose from the staircase like thunder crawling up from the earth. Max. He came down those stairs one agonizing step at a time, front legs stiff, back legs trembling, but the sound coming out of him was pure, undiluted menace. 12 years old, half-blind, arthritic, and grieving so hard he hadn't eaten in a week. Yet in that moment he looked every inch the police K-9 he'd been before Ryan retired him. The hair along his spine stood in a rigid black ridge. His lips peeled back from yellowed teeth, and the growl deepened into something that vibrated in the floorboards. He planted himself square in the arched doorway between the foyer and the living room, legs splayed wide, head lowered, blocking the path like a living barricade. The wife let out a nervous laugh. "Oh my goodness, he's protective." Her husband tried to step around. Max lunged. Not far, his hips wouldn't allow it, but far enough that teeth snapped shut inches from expensive wool. The man stumbled backward into his wife, color draining from his face. Candace fluttered forward with her best customer service smile. "Max, honey, it's okay, come here, boy." She reached for his collar. Max turned his head and snarled at her with such ferocity that Candace actually shrieked and fell on her backside. In 12 years Lauren had never once heard Max raise his voice to another human being. Not once. "Lauren," Candace hissed from the floor. "Control your dog." But Lauren was staring at Max, at the way his cloudy eyes burned with something beyond grief, something that looked disturbingly like recognition. And for the first time since Ryan took his last breath, a cold, clear certainty settled in her stomach. Max wasn't protecting the house. He was protecting her from these people. "Everybody out," she heard herself say. The words came out steady, almost calm. Viewings cancelled. The husband started blustering about contracts and good faith deposits, and how they'd driven 3 hours. But Lauren was already moving toward the front door, pulling it open, the November wind whipping in like judgment. Max never moved from his spot. He simply shifted his bulk, so that his body remained a furry, immovable wall between Lauren and the strangers. They left. The SUV reversed too fast down the driveway, flinging gravel. Candace followed, muttering about lawsuits and emotional distress, until the door slammed behind her and the lock clicked like a gunshot. Silence fell, thick and sudden. Lauren leaned her back against the door and slid down until she was sitting on the cold hardwood, knees to chest, staring at the old dog who had just saved her from something she hadn't even understood yet. Max turned then, slow and laborious, and limped across the foyer toward the built-in bookcase Ryan had made the first winter they lived here. He stopped directly in front of it, sat with a grunt of pain, and stared up at the third shelf, the one that held the old wooden box where Ryan kept his grandfather's World War II medals. Max's growl was gone. In its place was a low, urgent whine, almost conversational, as if he were saying, "Look. Please look." Lauren's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. She crossed the room on legs that didn't feel like her own, reached up, and pulled the heavy box down. It was heavier than she remembered. When she lifted the lid, the medals were still there, tarnished bronze and faded ribbon. But beneath them, wrapped in a soft cloth, was something new, a thick manila envelope and a small black flash drive. Max laid down with a sigh that seemed to come from the very center of the earth and rested his grey muzzle on her foot, while she opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter in Ryan's handwriting, dated exactly 1 week before he died. "My Lauren, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I've left you the biggest mess of our lives. I'm so sorry, babe. I thought I had more time." What followed was 8 handwritten pages, and a stack of printed documents that turned Lauren's world inside out. 6 years earlier, when the farm had a bad year, and the hospital bills from Ryan's first cancer scare started piling up, he had taken out a second mortgage on the house without telling her. He'd sworn he could pay it back before she ever found out. He couldn't. The interest compounded, the payments snowballed, and when the cancer came back this time, terminal, the bank quietly accelerated the foreclosure process. Ryan had spent his final months fighting them in secret, begging for extensions, gathering evidence, recording every phone call where a certain loan officer, named Mr. Eric Langford, bragged about how much easier it is to seize a property from a widow than from a living borrower. The investors who had just stormed out of her house in a huff. They were Langford's brother-in-law and sister. The cash offer wasn't generosity. It was the final step in a coordinated plan to buy the foreclosed property for pennies on the dollar before Lauren even knew she was being robbed. Max had known. He must have heard Ryan pacing the hallway at 3 a.m., whispering into the burner phone he thought Lauren never noticed. He'd watched Ryan hide papers in that box, watched him cry into his fur when the pain pills weren't enough. Dogs don't understand legalese, but they understand terror and love and the scent of the men who caused both. Lauren sat on the floor for a long time, long enough for the light to shift from grey to gold to the bruised purple of dusk, reading and rereading until the words stopped swimming. Max never moved. He simply rested his head across her thigh and breathed with her, in and out, steady as a heartbeat. When she finally stood, her legs were numb and her eyes were dry, the kind of dry that comes after every tear has already been spent. She looked down at the old dog, who had just drawn a line in the sand with nothing but his failing body, and said the first true thing she'd felt in weeks. "We're not selling, Max. We're keeping our home. And we're going to war." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and deliberate, covering Ryan's boot prints by the door 1 flake at a time. Inside, a widow and a dying dog began to plan how 2 broken hearts could bring an entire bank to its knees. And that was only the beginning. The snow kept falling all that night, thick, deliberate flakes that turned the fields into a white ocean and muffled the world until the only sounds were the creak of old beams and Max's ragged breathing. Lauren didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table under the single lamp, papers spread like autopsy photos, reading until the words blurred and her eyes burned. Every page was another betrayal. Emails from Eric Langford at First Heritage Bank that read like a predator toying with wounded prey. Once the borrower is deceased, the widow rarely has the resources to fight. A recorded voicemail, time-stamped 3 days after Ryan's terminal diagnosis, where Langford actually laughed and said, "These old farmhouses practically fall into our laps when the husband dies first. His sister and brother-in-law are lined up. We'll have it flipped before spring planting." Lauren listened to that voicemail 6 times. On the 7th, she pressed the phone so hard against her ear she left a bruise. Max climbed out of his bed, joints popping like kindling, and laid his head on her knee. He smelled like medicine and grief, but his eyes were steady. She buried her face in the loose fur at his neck and whispered, "He died protecting us from this, didn't he?" Max exhaled, long and slow, the canine version of yes. By dawn the driveway was drifted shut, the world erased under 18 inches of white. Lauren brewed coffee she didn't drink and called the only lawyer in 3 counties who still took contingency cases. Daniel Whitaker, retired Marine, missing half an index finger, office in a converted gas station outside Millersburg. She left a voicemail that cracked halfway through. He called back before the coffee cooled. "Mrs. Callahan? Dan Whitaker. I got your message. I also got a Google alert that pops every time First Heritage screws somebody new. Your husband's name came up last week. Bring everything you have. I'll clear my morning." She loaded Max into Ryan's old Silverado. He couldn't jump anymore, so she lifted all 90 pounds of him like he was made of glass, and drove the 23 miles on unplowed roads. The heater only worked on the driver's side. Max rode shotgun with his head out the cracked window, snowflakes melting on his muzzle, looking for all the world like a dog half his age. Whitaker's office smelled like gun oil and lemon pledge. He took one look at the envelope, the flash drive, the letter in Ryan's handwriting, and the hard line of his mouth went razor-thin. "This," he said, tapping the stack, "is felony wire fraud territory. Predatory lending, breach of good faith, possible RICO if we can tie the investors directly to bank officers." Ryan gathered more evidence in 8 weeks of dying than most people collect in 8 years. His eyes flicked to Max, who had planted himself across the doorway like a furry sentinel. "And that dog just saved your life." Lauren laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "He saved the house, at least." Whitaker leaned back, chair creaking. "You ready to fight dirty? Because banks don't lose gracefully." "I buried my husband 2 days ago," she said. "There's nothing left to be graceful about." He nodded once, the way men who've seen combat nod when they recognize another soldier. "Then we go to war." The first battle was quiet. Whitaker filed an emergency injunction to halt foreclosure, citing wrongful death acceleration and spousal concealment. The judge, a woman whose own father had lost a farm to First Heritage in the 90s, granted it the same day. The second battle was louder. Whitaker leaked the voicemail and 3 of the worst emails to a consumer advocacy reporter at the Columbus Dispatch. The article hit the internet at 6:03 p.m. on a Wednesday, headlines screaming in all caps. "Dying man's secret recordings expose bank predators targeting widows." By midnight the story was on every local news station from Cleveland to Cincinnati. By morning it was national. And that was when the harassment began. Candace the realtor left 17 voicemails in one day, voice climbing higher with each one until she was shrieking about slander and tortious interference. Eric Langford himself called from a block number and offered Lauren $75,000 cash to make this go away. She let it ring through to voicemail, then forwarded the recording to Whitaker. Unknown vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows, started parking across the road at 3 a.m., headlights aimed at the house like searchlights. Lauren stopped sleeping again. Max stopped eating entirely. He drank water only when she hand-fed him ice cubes and spent every night pacing the perimeter of the house, growling at shadows. Christmas came and went. The tree stayed in its box in the attic. Lauren cooked nothing. Friends dropped off casseroles that went cold on the porch because she couldn't bear to open the door. Some nights she sat on the floor with Max's head in her lap and read Ryan's letter out loud, tracing the loops of his handwriting until the paper grew soft. "I wanted to fix this before I left you," he'd written. "If I couldn't, I wanted you to have the weapons to finish it for me." On New Year's Eve the power went out for 9 hours. Lauren lit candles and discovered Max could no longer climb the stairs. She carried him up 1 step at a time, his back legs dragging, tears freezing on her cheeks in the 20-degree air. She laid him on Ryan's side of the bed and curled around him like a shield. Outside, fireworks popped in distant towns. Inside, she whispered every promise she'd ever made to Ryan into the fur at Max's neck until the words ran out, and there was only the sound of an old dog's heart struggling to keep beating for the people he loved. January turned brutal. Negative temperatures, wind that howled like the world itself was grieving. The bank filed motion after motion to dismiss. Whitaker countered with discovery requests thick enough to choke a shredder. Every day brought new paperwork, new threats, new nights where Lauren woke gasping from dreams of the house burning while she stood frozen in the yard. Then, on the coldest night of the year, someone cut the brake line on Ryan's truck. She discovered it the next morning when she went to drive Max to the vet. His back legs had started dragging permanently. Fluid puddled beneath the chassis like blood. The sheriff came, took photos, shrugged. Hard to prove intent. Whitaker's eyes went flat when she told him. That afternoon he hand-delivered subpoenas to Langford, his sister, his brother-in-law, and 3 bank vice presidents. The war had officially moved from paperwork to open combat. Through it all, Max held the line. He was down to 68 pounds, bones sharp under sagging skin. But every time a strange vehicle turned into the driveway, he found the strength to haul himself to the door and plant his body across the threshold. His growls had turned raspy, almost soundless, yet the message was unmistakable. Not while I'm still breathing. The vet gave him 2 weeks, maybe 3. Lauren carried him outside to potty, carried him back in, spoon-fed him boiled chicken and rice he barely swallowed. She stopped answering the phone entirely. She lived on coffee and fury and the stubborn rhythm of Max's heart against her ankle while she worked at the kitchen table until 4 a.m. February brought the first crack in the bank's armor. A junior loan officer, 26 years old and terrified of prison, rolled over. He brought Whitaker a thumb drive full of internal memos that proved First Heritage had a literal playbook titled Widow Protocol. The Columbus Dispatch ran it front page above the fold. Donations started pouring into a legal defense fund Whitaker set up. Strangers sent cards addressed to Max the Hero Dog. A GoFundMe titled, Help Lauren and Max Keep Their Home, hit $100,000 in 4 days. The bank offered settlement, $250,000, clear title, gag order. Lauren spat on the offer and mailed it back in pieces. She wanted blood. March arrived like a fist. The trial date was set for the 21st in the federal courthouse in Columbus. Lauren Callahan v. First Heritage Bank et al. Civil case with criminal referrals pending. The media ate it up. Good Morning America wanted an interview. CNN parked a satellite truck outside the farm. Lauren refused them all. She had one goal, and one goal only. To walk into that courtroom with Max at her side and watch every person who had tried to steal her home look Ryan's dog in the eye while their lies collapsed. Max had other plans. On the morning of March 19th, Lauren found him collapsed beside Ryan's empty boots in the foyer, unable to rise. His breathing was shallow, his gums grey. She carried him to the truck, wrapped in the quilt they'd been married under, and drove 90 miles an hour to the Ohio State Veterinary Teaching Hospital. The oncologist who met them was gentle but blunt. Cancer in the spleen, ruptured overnight. Internal bleeding. Hours, maybe less. Lauren sat on the floor of the exam room and held his head while the doctor explained pain management, quality of life, the humane choice. Max licked her wrist once, slow and deliberate, then rested his muzzle on her knee and closed his eyes. She made the call she'd been dreading for months. Put him on fluids and keep him comfortable, she said. I need him for one more day. They gave her a private room with a cot. She stayed 48 hours straight, sleeping in snatches, singing every song Ryan used to hum while fixing fence posts, reading the new stack of letters strangers had sent to Max the Hero Dog. On the morning of the 21st, the vet carried Max to the truck in a wagon because he weighed less than the quilt now. They loaded him into the passenger seat with pillows and a morphine drip taped to his foreleg, and Lauren drove to Columbus with the hazard lights blinking the entire way. The courthouse steps were a circus. Reporters, cameras, protesters with signs that read justice for Ryan and Max. Lauren wore the same black dress she'd worn to the funeral. Max wore the service dog vest Ryan had bought him when he retired from the sheriff's department, the one that still smelled faintly of his old partner's cologne. She carried him up the marble steps herself, all 53 pounds of him now, cradled like a child. Cameras flashed. Someone in the crowd started clapping. It spread until the whole plaza was roaring. Max lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound, and for one moment the old fire flickered in his cloudy eyes. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Eric Langford sat at the defense table in a $5,000 suit, face Botoxed into a mask of concern. His sister and brother-in-law were in the gallery, pale and whispering. When Lauren walked in carrying Max, the entire room went still. Judge Elena Ramirez, a woman whose own husband had died of cancer the year before, looked up from the bench and visibly swallowed. Mrs. Callahan, she said quietly. You may place the dog wherever he'll be most comfortable. Lauren walked straight to the plaintiff's table, laid the quilt on the floor, and settled Max on it, so he faced the defense table directly. His eyes never left Langford. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest, the last sound he had left. Whitaker began with Ryan's letter. He projected it on the screen, page by page, Ryan's handwriting filling the wall, while Lauren's attorney read it aloud in a voice that cracked only once. Then came the recordings. Ryan's voice, thin and pain-riddled, filled the courtroom. Conversations with Langford where the banker laughed about picking the bones clean, about how Lauren would never even know what hit her. Langford's attorney tried to object on grounds of authenticity. Judge Ramirez shut him down with a look that could have frozen fire. They played the voicemail where Langford said, "Widows don't fight. They fold." Half the gallery was openly crying. Jurors who had been stone-faced all morning now stared at Langford like he was something stuck to their shoe. Then Whitaker called his final witness. Plaintiff calls Max Callahan to the stand. A ripple of stunned laughter broke the tension, then died instantly when Lauren stood, walked to the witness box, and lifted Max into her arms. The bailiff swore him in with a hand on his graying head. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the morphine dripping. Whitaker approached slowly. "Max," he said, voice gentle, "do you recognize the man who hurt your dad?" He pointed at Langford. Max lifted his head with what looked like the last strength in his body. His lips peeled back from his teeth, and the growl that came out was barely air, but it carried to the back row. Langford flinched so hard his chair scraped backward. Whitaker turned to the jury. No further questions. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Closing arguments were short. Whitaker didn't need them. He simply rested his hand on Max's head and said, "Ryan Callahan spent his last weeks on Earth gathering evidence to protect the woman he loved. His dog spent his last day on Earth making sure that evidence saw the light. The defense would have you believe this is about money. It's not. It's about whether a dying man and an old dog get to protect one grieving woman from predators in suits. I think we all know the answer." The jury deliberated for 41 minutes. When they filed back in, the foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Lauren Callahan, on all counts. We further recommend the maximum statutory penalty and immediate criminal referral to the Department of Justice." Judge Ramirez did not bang the gavel. She laid it down gently, eyes on Max. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, voice thick, "this court awards you clear and unencumbered title to your home, $5.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages and court costs. And on a personal note, thank you for bringing him today. Some justice only a dog can deliver." The gallery erupted. Cameras flashed. Langford's sister started screaming that it wasn't fair. Security removed her in handcuffs when she lunged at Lauren. Lauren didn't hear any of it. She was on her knees on the courtroom floor, cradling Max as his breathing slowed. The morphine had done its work. His eyes were peaceful now, fixed on her face. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "You did it. We kept our home. Ryan's proud of you. I'm proud of you." Max's tail thumped once against the quilt, weak but deliberate. Then he licked her cheek, one last time, and the light went out of his eyes. He died in her arms at 3:17 p.m. on March 21st, 2025, in the exact spot where justice had finally been served. The bailiff cried. The judge cried. Half the jury cried. Someone started clapping again, slow at first, then the entire courtroom, standing, applauding a 12-year-old German shepherd who had refused to let his family be broken twice. They carried him out wrapped in the wedding quilt, past banks of cameras that lowered in respect as she passed. The footage aired on every network that night. Within hours, #ThankYouMax was the #1 trending topic worldwide.